and saw faces of people I really like and really love and really admire. Thank you to Kurt and NDRN for giving me this opportunity. Before I start, and I will make every attempt to stick to my timeline here, but who knows, I would be remiss not to acknowledge Bob Judeff. Over the past 25 years, and I can tell you this without any hesitation, the life of every single Oregonian with a disability has been positively impacted by Disability Rights Oregon. A feat that would have been impossible without Bob Judeff's steadfast, courageous, unflagging determination to do right. So I'd like you to help me join in by giving Bob a round of applause. Of course, you will be held accountable for any damage to Social Security during what we are now referring to as Judeff's watch. I don't know the first time I read Thomas Paine. These are the times that try men's souls. But I guess I didn't really understand it as well as I do today. We would be remiss not to acknowledge that we're in some difficult times. But I try to be positive. I look at the personalities that you as an organization have to deal with now who were not present when I was a member of the board or your president. I particularly appreciated Dr. Carson recently. I've not been that impressed with his housing, but I needed to upgrade the furniture in my office. And, he was very helpful, and I was a little concerned, but now that I know I have a middle-class tax break coming in the next 2 weeks, I'm not too worried about paying the bill. Also, I think we've been hard, I know Jeff Merkley and I were, on Eric Prince's sister when we tried to block her appointment. But I've come to appreciate her too. I don't think any of us can really relate to how difficult it must be to be responsible for the upkeep and maintenance on 30 yachts. This is no small feat. I'd also like to acknowledge the help that we're getting from the Koch Brothers Foundation and appreciate them loaning us an ACL commissioner for the next couple of years. Is Kim here?
No.
Well, that's too bad, because I did want to thank Maine for giving us Mary Mayhew, a woman who will teach us not to say the M word in the future. This is not funny, and when I was thinking about what I was going to say to you today, I asked myself, what am I doing? And I will ask you, what are you doing to be a good steward of this organization? We are not the first generation to face very hard times, not only politically but legally. And the people who faced them in earlier generations were just like us. They had the same brain, they had the same determination. And I was thinking the other day about how would you feel if you were at the receiving end of the famous case of Dred Scott versus Sandford, 60 U.S. 1857. When all of a sudden, as an American lawyer, you learned for sure that Afro-American slaves had no legal rights. They were simply property. That was the law. And furthermore, the law was that if you aided a slave, a runaway slave, you were liable for both criminal and civil penalties, and that included going to court and defending them. Now, these things can seem like they're a long ways back, but in fact, they're not. And I've tried to think a lot about what I would have done if I had been an American lawyer in the 1850s. Many of you know my partner, Amber, from Chicago. A few months ago, she and I made a trip to Marshall, Michigan. And we went there because it is the place where there's the most 1840s houses still intact. But we stayed in an inn that was extant during the 1840s, and in fact, was modified by Sojourner Truth because it was the northern terminus of the Underground Railroad. So being there and seeing the secret passageways, the places to hide, really made Dred Scott come to life for me. And we got very involved in the details of a time when sheriffs in South Carolina came to retrieve some runaway slaves, and the citizens of Marshall defended them and aided in their escape. And for that, they were all sued in federal court. And the entire 300 people that participated in this, helping the slaves, ended up with a substantial financial judgment against them, which, however, was never paid because a big mistake was made. And this idea that I see floating around sometimes on social media or in easy conversation about armed rebellion is simply a thought of the thoughtless. Don't go there. Don't even talk that way. It's not that I object to it. I object to stupidity. In 1860, the population of the United States was 31 million. The Civil War cost us 620,000 fatalities, or approximately the same number of people have been killed in all of America's wars combined up until today. Our population today is $329 million, or 329 million people. If that war were played out today, we'd have 66 million fatalities. As I said, this is a remedy thought of only by the thoughtless. But what about our own time? What are we doing to be good stewards to this organization? And I thought specifically of the famous case of Citizens United versus the Federal Election Commission. Only 8 years old. It's only been 8 years, and it has already done tremendous damage to this democracy. Corporations are people. And any kind of campaign finance law is an unconstitutional interference with the First Amendment rights of rich people. It plays out in our daily lives. As I'm sure many of you know, Nike is located here, about 15 miles to the west, and its founder, Phil Knight, recently retired, has just coughed up $2.5 million of his own money for the Republican gubernatorial candidate in the state. I coughed up 50. So, as Orwell said, we're all equal, but some of us are more equal than others. This challenges us because Citizens United is not going to go away. I have thought in preparation for this time of all the ways you can get rid of a Supreme Court case. And I'm telling you, few of us will live long enough to see Citizens United overturned. So what are we going to do in the meantime? What are you thinking about? How do we overcome this tremendous disadvantage? And furthermore, how do we reconcile the ethical issue? If I, Therese, Chris, Tom, are looking at a political question, a candidate, or an issue, we have great leeway in deciding what we will do. We can vote yes, we can vote no, we can refrain from voting. But by giving corporations the right to dump unlimited amounts of money, we come face to face with the fiduciary obligation of directors of corporations, whose sole obligation under the law is to return the maximum amount of profit to their shareholders. So, for example, were there to be a referendum on global warming, I'm pretty sure we could assume that Exxon would oppose that. And it's not that they're evil so much as it is that that's the law. We now have tremendous political power in the hands of people whose sole duty under the law is to make money. by making the point that anything is possible. None of us know the future, but anything is possible. Bear with me. In 1812, Napoleon Bonaparte invaded Russia. And in September of that year, a great battle was fought 40 miles west of Moscow at a place called Borodino. And in the ensuing 100 years after that, we all know what happened to Russia, don't we? We know about the Decembrists. We know that the Tsar staged his own death and disappeared. We know about revolutions. We know about assassinations. It's easy to look back at Russia at the turn of the century and think that it was ripe for the plucking, but it wasn't. And nobody realized that it could be. And so in September of 1912, a great celebration took place on the centennial of the Battle of Borodino on the field. And the highlight of the day was an appearance in a grand open car by Nicholas and Alexandra, demonstrating that the Romanov dynasty was every bit as strong as it would ever be. And in the back seat of that car was the second family of Russia, the Poniatowskis. And it included a 12-year-old boy whose name, like his father's, his grandfather's, and his great-grandfather, who incidentally had been the lover of Catherine the Great, was Joseph. Joseph Poniatowski was the last graduate of the Imperial Cavalry School in St. Petersburg. And as the world, his world unraveled, and things that seemed impossible happened to him, he incidentally led the cavalry charge in 1939 of the Polish Lancers that tried to stop the German panzers outside of Warsaw. In 1952, he immigrated to New York City and became a translator for a publishing company. Then he came here, and he was a professor of history at the University of Portland. And I read about him in the newspaper when he retired. And because I had been an active member of the Napoleonic Society of France, I said to myself, I'm going to find that SOB if it's the last thing I ever did. And so I did. And so when I say to you that anything is possible, I offer this as evidence that I, the son of a working-class railroad man in Idaho, became good friends with Joseph Poniatowski. Now, what could be more improbable than that? We drank a lot of cognac. We talked about the old caviar markets in Moscow. And his memories of the 20th century were epic. And it was my honor to attend his funeral, which was a high military mass at Mount Angel Abbey. So I'm just saying, if I can become friends with Joseph Poniatowski, anything is possible. And again, I ask you, how are you preparing yourself to be a good steward for this organization? In 216 BC, Hannibal landed on the eastern coast of Spain at a location we now call Cartagena, New Carthage. And he brought a massive army up the Iberian Peninsula, across the mountains, across the Rhone River with his elephants, came down onto the plains of Italy. And on the 2nd of August, he was confronted by an army of Romans, 88,000 of them. Hannibal pulled off what military people have been trying to do ever since, a double envelopment of his opponent. And at the end of the day, only 15,000 Romans were still alive. Rome was totally at the mercy of Hannibal. 3 days later, a very shaken and frightened Roman Senate met in Rome. And for the first time, a 15-year-old boy took his seat. His father, his uncle, and his 3 brothers, having perished at Cannae. And according to Livy, this is what he said. What are you doing to prepare yourself to be a good steward of this organization? This young boy, whose name was Scipio, said, I swear that I will neither desert the cause of Rome nor allow any citizen of Rome to desert it. If knowingly I violate this oath, may Jupiter visit with the most horrible perdition my house, my family, and my fortune. I insist that you all take this oath, and let the man who demurs be assured that my sword is drawn against him. "14 years later, Scipio Africanus burned Carthage to the ground. That would never have happened without his determination 3 days after the disaster of Cannae. What do we need now? We need patience. I think it helps to step back from the 24-hour news cycle and really evaluate our own values, the things that matter to us, think about how we can preserve them, hopefully even someday extend them. We need faith. We need faith in a philosophy. We need faith in a belief of decency, of fairness, of education, of thought. And when I ask you one more time, what are you doing to be good stewards of this organization? My suggested answer is this: be Scipio. Free our people. I love NDRN. It's great being here today. I have a lot of wonderful friends here. Thank you for the invitation.